Good evening. How's everybody doing on a Sunday? Yom Rishon. Let's light up the darkness. Today we're finishing chapter 8 with God's help here in Tractate Sotah, the 18th volume of the Talmud. Chapter 8, we're opening with Mishna number 2. We'll get into Mishna number 3. Close the chapter and move into chapter 9. We are on somewhat of a digression. This tractate is Sotah, the laws of the suspected adulteress. When the temple was standing in Jerusalem and the suspected adulteress would be brought to the temple, she and her husband would come. She'd prove her innocence if she was innocent by drinking the bitter water. But she would be warned that if indeed you're guilty, if you committed adultery, these waters will kill you. That warning could be spoken in a language other than Hebrew, other than the sacred tongue. Once we got into the subject of which matters can be spoken, which matters must be spoken in Hebrew, which don't have to be. You don't have to say the Shema or the Amidah or the grace after meals in Hebrew. But when the Levites and the Kohanim read the blessings and curses to the assembled tribes as Joshua was about to lead the children of Israel into the promised land, those blessings and curses had to be spoken in Hebrew. When a priest anointed for war is saying to the troops both positive words and negative words, right? Positive, you should not be afraid. Your enemy is championed by mortals. You are championed by the Holy One above. No need to be afraid. However, if someone is afraid, he can't overcome his fear, he should go home. Somebody who has betrothed a wife and not yet, started the marriage, as it were, he should go home. He who has built a house and not yet dedicated it. He who has planted a vineyard and not yet reaped produce from it. He should go home. Those matters spoken by the priest anointed for war, and as we learned yesterday, assisted by the officers of the army, yes, those were spoken in Hebrew. So we continue that discussion. And let's just see who's in the house on a Sunday. Yehudit in South Carolina, Bill in Mid-Missouri, Bella in Florida, Melissa in Great Neck, Paula wishing everyone a happy Mother's Day, Elvis, glad to be back. Hasn't been live. He hasn't been with us for the live show in a while. Good to have you, Elvis, checking in from Finger Lakes. Renee in Indiana, Shandor in the Bronx, Sharon in New Jersey, Sue Strauss in the house from Chicago, Guy in Ohio, Franco from Italy. Bill, I think we left somewhat of a digression a few dots ago. Joseph checking in Massachusetts. Marjorie in Georgia. Welcome, everybody. I think before the end, we'll get back to the Sotah, but it's not going to happen yet. We've got another matter to digress upon tonight when we enter chapter 9. So our daf is a Mem Dalet, page 44. This tractate has 49 pages in it, so we are approaching a siyum, my friends. So what if we're 44 today, Monday 46, Tuesday 47, Wednesday 48, Thursday 49. If all goes well, we'll make a siyum and celebrate the completion of our journey through Tractate Sotah on Thursday. So we'll confirm that as we get closer to it, but that looks to be the schedule. All right, we picked this up on page 44a, and the Mishna, our Mishna, right, Mishna number 2 here in chapter 8, taught that among the statements that were said before the army went into battle, what man is there that has betrothed the wife and has not taken her? Let him go and return to his house, from Deuteronomy 20, verse 7. And the sages taught, quote, that has betrothed, this is referring to one who betroths a virgin, and to one who betroths a widow, and to one whose yavama is a widow awaiting her yavam, right? A brother who died childless, his brother may marry the widow, and their first child will be the heir of the brother who died. Or the brother-in-law and the widow may choose not to marry, in which case they have to perform the chalitza ceremony. But this man, if he's a soldier, whose brother died before, and now he's going to go perform yibum with his yavama, right, the widow, then he may go home. He should go home from the army and not go to war for 1 year. So, and we learned, and even if there are 5 brothers and one of them dies in the war, all the surviving brothers return for the widow. Only one of them will perform yibum with her and marry her, but all 4 return from the war. Now, when the verse specifies and has not taken her, this excludes men in forbidden marriages. A widow who is betrothed to a high priest, a divorcee or a yavama who perform chalitza, who is betrothed to a common priest, a mamzeret, a Jewish woman born of adultery, or a Gibeonite woman who is betrothed to an Israelite, or an Israelite woman who is betrothed to a mamzer man or a Gibeonite man. All these are prohibited marriages, and the man would not return home for that. Now the Gemara asks, shall we say that this opinion is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yosei HaGalili? As if it were in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yosei HaGalili, he says, when the verse singles out fearful and faint-hearted, right? Because later the priest anointed for war says, any of you who are fearful and faint-hearted, like you're just trembling in your boots, lest you go to war and your fear infect your fellow soldiers, better you should go home. Now, Rabbi Yosei HaGalili says, why is this man fearful? Is it simply that he's afraid that he's going to meet his death in battle, period? He's afraid to go to war? Or is it that he's a sinner of some sort and he feels that he has no merit to protect him when he goes into that war, and that's why he's afraid, right? As if, so this opinion must not be in accordance with Rabbi Yosei HaGalili, as if it were in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yosei HaGalili, he says, when the verse singles out fearful and faint-hearted, this is referring to one who is afraid because of sins that he has. So according to this interpretation, one who marries a woman forbidden to him should return home from war, right? Just before we heard that somebody who is betrothed, a man who is betrothed to a woman that will become a legitimate marriage, he's permitted to betroth her, he goes home. But if he's betrothed to a woman who is forbidden to him, like a Cohen, a priest, who is betrothed to a divorced woman, he's not allowed to marry her. She can marry any other Jew, but not a priest. So he does not go home because this betrothal is prohibited. It's illegitimate, so to speak. If he marries her, it's still a valid marriage, though he will be disqualified from serving as a priest in the temple. Nonetheless, he can't use that betrothal as his justification to go home from the war. But Rabbi Yosei HaGalili might say, well, if somebody betrothed somebody who is forbidden to him, that kind of a sin is what would make him fearful and faint-hearted, and therefore he should, because he has no merit to protect him on the battlefield, and therefore such a man should go home. So which is it? And the Gemara answers, even if you say that the ruling is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yosei HaGalili, such a man does not return in accordance with the opinion of Rabbah. As Rabbah said, a man is never liable for a forbidden marriage until he engages in sexual intercourse with his wife. If a priest, a common priest, betroths, right, enters into betrothal with a divorced woman. So betrothal indicates that they have not yet slept together, because one of the forms of consummating the betrothal and turning it into marriage is sleeping together. They could also stand under the chuppah and get married. But if he's only betrothed to her, right, it indicates that he hasn't yet slept with her. So he's actually not liable for the transgression of marrying this woman who is prohibited to him until he actually marries her and has sexual intercourse with her. So he doesn't have to worry about a sin that will erase, the merit he needs to survive the battle, as it were. So the reason that he's not going home is because he entered into a prohibited betrothal, and that's not going to qualify him to leave the army and go home. Note that betrothal is equivalent to marriage, in the sense that if you break off a betrothal, the husband has to, the betrothed man has to give the betrothed woman a bill of divorce, even though they haven't stood under the chuppah, even though they haven't consummated the marriage. And in this way, betrothal under Jewish law is different than engagement in secular law, right? An engagement you can just break off. You were never married. You don't need a divorce from an engagement. But under Jewish law, you do for a betrothal. So what is the reason that he shall, and how do we know this? With regard to the forbidden marriages of a high priest, the Torah states, a widow or a divorcee or a profane woman or a harlot, these he shall not take, and he shall not profane his seed among his people. Leviticus 2:14. So what is the reason that he shall not take one of these women as his wife? It is due to he shall not profane his seed by engaging in sexual intercourse with her. Due to that reason, he is not flogged for committing this transgression until he engages in sexual intercourse with a woman who is forbidden to him. Therefore, even according to Rabbi Yosei HaGalili, one who merely betroths a forbidden wife might not return home from the ranks. New subject. The sages taught Tosefta 7:20. The Torah states, what man is there that has built, Deuteronomy 20 verse 5, and then has planted, and finally that has betrothed, right? These categories of people who go home. And the Torah taught that a person, what do we learn from the Torah saying that these are the three categories of a person who goes home? And the Torah states them in this order. Who is the man that has built a home? Who is the man that has planted a vineyard? And who is the man that has betrothed a wife? And not yet dedicated her, or not yet dedicated the house, not yet reaped from the vineyard, and not yet consummated the marriage. These should all go home. Now, from the fact that those were stated in that order in the Torah has taught a person the desired mode of behavior, meaning a person should first build a house, then plant a vineyard, and afterward marry a woman. And even King Solomon said in his wisdom, from Proverbs 24:27, prepare your work outside and make it fit for yourself in the field, and afterward build your house. And the sages explain, prepare your work outside, this means build a house, and make it fit for yourself in the field, this is the vineyard. And afterward you shall, quote, build your house, this refers to getting married. Right? Very often, the sages understood a man's house to be a sort of polite way of saying, his marriage, right? It's not. Sometimes we're talking about physically building a house, as in the first clause, and other times we're talking about metaphorically building a marriage, building, a couple that is going to produce children, etc. Alternatively, this verse may be understood as relating to Torah study. Prepare your work outside. This means first you study the Bible and make it fit for yourself in the field. That means next you study Mishna. And afterward you shall build your house. Then you study Gemara and the analysis of and deliberation of the statements of the sages. So alternatively, yet another interpretation, prepare your work outside. This is studying Bible and Mishnah. And make it fit for yourselves in the field. This is studying Gemara. Afterwards you shall build your house. These are good deeds, right? So if in fact you study much Torah and you study much Mishnah and you study much Gemara and you don't become a kinder, more generous, more stand-up, more respectable, more honored, more admired person, so you're doing something wrong. All this learning that we're doing is meant to get in our bones and make us more upstanding human beings. Rabbi Eliezer, the son of Rabbi Yosei HaGalili, says, yet another interpretation, prepare your work outside, study the Bible and Mishnah and Gemara. Make it fit for yourself in the field. These are good deeds. Afterwards shall you build your house. This means expound upon new understandings of Torah and receive reward, which is possible only after the initial steps, right? Before you're going to be qualified to teach, you must study a lot. According to that view. According to other views, as soon as you've understood something, endeavor to share it with somebody who has not heard it. innovating within Torah, yes, that requires tremendous experience and dedication and learning. Now the Mishnah teaches, and these are the men who do not return from the ranks, right? So they've built something, but it doesn't qualify as a house that excuses them from service in the army for a year. Who are the ones who do not return from the ranks? One who builds a gateway or an enclosed veranda or a balcony. Rabbi Yehuda says even one who rebuilds a house as it originally stood would not return. He built a new house, but he was just replacing the house he had before. A sage taught in Sotah 7:18, if one adds one additional row of stones to the original structure, he returns. If you expand your house, that's like building a new house. If you only rebuild the existing house, it's not. Rabbi Eliezer says, even one who builds a new brick house in the Sharon would not return. Why? Because these houses were flimsy and often collapsed. A sage taught this is because the owners renew it twice in a period of 7 years, and it is therefore not considered a permanent structure. Very tough place to build a house, the Sharon. Now the Mishnah teaches these are the men who do not even move from their places. These guys have such a clear exemption that they don't have to show up for the assembling of the army, and then when the priest and the officers read who is excused to go home, get dismissed. The ones who show up to the assembly and get dismissed, for example, is one who betrothed a woman and has not yet married her. One who just married and is still in the first year of marriage, he doesn't even have to go to the assembly. He definitely stays home with his wife to cheer his wife during that first year of marriage. Right? These are the men who do not even move from their places. One who built a house and dedicated it within the year. One who planted a vineyard and used its fruit for less than a year. One who marries his betrothed. And one who marries his yavama. As it is stated, quote, when a man takes a new wife, he shall not go out with the army, neither shall he be charged with any business. He shall be free for his house 1 year, and shall cheer his wife whom he has taken. Deuteronomy 24:5. With respect to a new husband's exemption, as opposed to a betrothed man, the sages taught a number of laws from this verse. From the term a new wife, I have derived only that a man returns only for a new virgin wife. From where do I derive that this also applies to a widow or a divorcee who is newly married to him? The verse states a wife in any case. If so, what is the meaning when the verse states a new wife? It is referring to one who is new for him, excluding one who remarries his own divorced wife. If he's remarrying a woman he was previously married to and divorced, no, he gets no exemption from the army. But if he marries any other woman, whether she's a virgin or a widow or a divorcee, he's excused for that year. Now the sages taught with regard to the verse, he shall not go out with the army. Now one might have thought it is with the army that he does not go out, but he does go to supply water and food to the army and to repair the roads for them. Therefore, the verse states, neither shall he be charged with any business. As opposed to one who betrothed a woman and has not yet married her, he goes home, but he is responsible to join in the war effort. One might have thought that I include even one who has built a house and has not dedicated it, or one who has planted a vineyard and has not used its fruit, or one who has betrothed a woman and has not taken her as his wife. And the verse states, neither shall he be charged with any business. You do not charge him with any responsibilities, but you do charge the others. The one who built a house and has not yet dedicated it, he goes home or he stays home, but he joins in the war effort. The Gemara asks, and since the Torah states, neither shall he be charged with any business about the newly married man, why do I need to be taught he shall not go out with the army? And the Gemara answers, the Torah adds this clause so that he will violate two prohibitions if he does go out to war. He shall not go out with the army, and neither shall he be charged with any business. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 2 here in chapter 8. Here's Mishnah number 3. The Mishnah continues its discussion of the speech given before battle. And the officers shall speak further to the people, and they shall say, what man is there that is fearful and fainthearted? Let him go and return unto his house. Deuteronomy 20, verse 8. So Rabbi Akiva says that is fearful and faint-hearted. This is to be understood as it indicates that the man is unable to stand in the battle ranks and to see a sword drawn because it will terrify him. Rabbi Yosei HaGalili says that is fearful and faint-hearted, this refers to one who is afraid because of the sins he has, as we learned before. And he too returns home. Therefore, the Torah provided him with all these additional reasons for exemption from the army so that he can ascribe his leaving to one of them. In this way, the sinner may leave the ranks without having to publicly acknowledge that he is a sinner. Very interesting, right? It's only this minority opinion of Rabbi Yosei HaGalili that you leave because you're afraid that you're a sinner and therefore you might die in the battle. Rabbi Kiva would say you leave if you're truly terrified, right? If you're just quaking in your boots, then you leave. Otherwise, you don't leave. Now, Rabbi Yosei says, with regard to one who has betrothed a woman forbidden to him, including a widow betrothed to a high priest, a divorcee, or yavam who performed chalitza, betrothed to a common priest, or a mamzeret, or a Gibeonite woman betrothed to an Israelite, or a daughter of an Israelite betrothed to a mamzer or a Gibeonite, this man is he whom the verse calls fearful and faint-hearted. So Rabbi Yosei seems to be saying the same thing as Rabbi Yosei HaGalili. These are different sages. This is the one who is fearful and faint-hearted, and he fears that his sin will jeopardize his safety in the war. So the Mishnah continues its discussion, and the verse states, "It shall be when the officers conclude speaking to the people, that captains of legions shall be appointed at the head of the people." And the Mishnah adds, as well as at the rear of the people. So the officers station guards, zekifin, in front of them, and other guards behind them, and they have iron rods, kashilin, in their hands. And with regard to anyone who attempts to turn back and flee from the war, the guard has license to beat his legs, because the beginning of fleeing is a downfall on the battlefield. As it is stated, Israel has fled before the Philistines, and there has been also a great slaughter among the people, from 1 Samuel 4:17. And likewise it says further on, quote, "And the men of Israel fled from before the Philistines and fell down slain in Mount Gilboa." All right, so you have this, you need the people to be strong and resolute. And if you have a bunch of deserters running away from the army, that will infect the morale of the general army like a virus and cause this fear to run through them, and it will make the army so much less effective that this could be the beginning of the downfall of the army. Whereas if you kept these guards behind them and stopped the deserters from running away, you might not have that loss. Now the Mishnah adds, in what case are all of these statements with regard to the various exemptions from war said? They are said with regard to elective wars. But in wars whose mandate is a mitzvah, wars that we're commanded to fight, everyone goes. There's no exemption for the newlyweds. No exemption for the newly betrothed. No exemption for the one who just built a house. That's only elective wars. If it's an obligatory war, a commanded war, then everyone goes. Literally it says, everyone goes. Even a groom from his room and a bride from her wedding canopy. Rabbi Yehuda said, in what case are all these statements with regard to the various exemptions from war said? They are said with regard to wars whose mandate is a commandment. But in obligatory wars, everyone goes, even a groom from his room and a bride from her wedding canopy. Did they distinguish between an obligatory war and a war whose mandate is a mitzvah, a commandment? What's the difference between a commanded war and an obligatory war? We're now going to find out. But before we do, you might have, caught this. When it's an obligatory war, everyone goes, even the groom from his room. Okay, the groom, he has no exemption to go cheer his wife. And a bride from her wedding canopy. Are we saying that the women of Israel fight too? Yes, in modern Israel, women are certainly members of the IDF. In fact, we can dedicate tonight's show to my daughter's, one of her best friends, Gabby, they graduated high school together last year, and Gabby is now serving in the IDF in Israel. We spoke with her today on FaceTime, and we honor her for her service and dedicate our show today to her well-being and that of her whole unit. Now, but in ancient times, did the women of Israel go to war? What does Rav Steinsaltz say about this? A bride from her wedding canopy. Some commentaries find the Mishnah statement surprising. Are we to understand from this singular passing reference that women are supposed to go to war? They explain that the Mishnah does not say that the bride goes out to fight, but rather that women are obligated to provide non-combat assistance in the war effort. Others write that the Mishnah does not mean to require women to participate in the war at all, asserting that the Tana is simply employing a turn of phrase from the Bible. So this has been interpreted at different times. Certainly, when Jerusalem was under siege and everyone was going to die, you can bet that the women were helping in the war effort. All hands on deck, as it were. And in modern times, that's an absolute staple of the Israeli army. Men and women do fight together. Now, Gemara. The Gemara asks, with regard to their understanding that the fearful and faint-hearted is referring to one harboring sins, and that's why he's fearful and faint-hearted. What difference is there between the opinion of Rabbi Yosei and the opinion of Rabbi Yosei HaGalila? It seemed that both of them were saying that the one who is fearful and faint-hearted is so because he's harboring sins that he's the one to talk about, but he's afraid that because of his sins he'll go to the war and die, and therefore he would be excused. But they both seem to say the same thing. And the Gemara answers, there is a practical difference between them with regard to a sin which violates a prohibition by rabbinic law. According to Rabbi Yosei HaGalili, one who has violated a rabbinic law returns home also because he's afraid that violating a rabbinic decree will cause him to, not have enough merit on the battlefield and he'll die. Whereas Rabbi Yosei maintains that one returns home only if he has violated a Torah law, as in the case of a priest who married a divorcee. Now the Gemara married, not just betrothed. Now the Gemara asks, in accordance with whose opinion is that which is taught in a baraisa, if one spoke between donning the tefillin of the arm and the tefillin of the head, he has a sin on his hands, and due to that sin, he returns from the ranks of soldiers waging war. So if we're going to say that one who returns home because of his sin, okay, it's either Rabbi Yosei or Rabbi Yosei HaGalili. So what's the prohibition? That when a man puts on tefillin in the morning, he says a blessing, he puts the tefillin on the arm, and then he's going to have to put the tefillin on the head. In between putting on the arm tefillin and the head tefillin, he must not talk with his neighbor. This sounds like an easy prohibition to fulfill. It's not always so easy. We're in the morning, where the prayers haven't started yet. We're kind of assembling. You're seeing your buddy. You haven't seen him since yesterday or maybe a few weeks. Hey, good morning. How you doing? Oh, I just spoke between donning the arm tefillin and the head tefillin. It actually takes great focus and concentration not to talk. And that's why some people have the practice of whenever their tefillin is on them, they don't do any talking other than praying, and that is a very virtuous practice. So the question is, the prohibition on talking between putting on the arm tefillin and putting on the head tefillin, is that a rabbinic decree or a Torah prohibition? If one spoke between donning the tefillin of the arm and the tefillin of the head, he has a sin on his hands, and due to this he returns from the ranks of the soldiers waging war. In accordance with whose opinion does this man return? It is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yosei HaGalili, who maintains that one returns even due to a minor transgression. The Gemara asks, who is the Tana, the Rabbi, the Mishna, who taught this law that the sages taught in a baraisa? If one heard the sounds of trumpets and trembled, or he heard the knocking of shields and he trembled, or he heard the sharpening of swords, and urine was trickling down his knees in fear, he returns from the battlefront. In accordance with whose opinion is this? Shall we say that it is the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, who interprets fearful and faint-hearted literally? And therefore it is not the opinion of Rabbi Yosei HaGalili? Is that what we should think? The Gemara answers, in this case, even Rabbi Yosei HaGalili would concede that this man should return, because it is written, what man is there that is fearful and faint-hearted? Let him go and return, lest his brethren's heart melt as his heart. So someone so clearly frightened invariably spreads his fear to those around him. Now, the Mishnah teaches, and it shall be when the officers conclude speaking to the people that captains of legions shall be appointed to the head of the people, and that the guards have the license to beat the legs of anyone who attempts to turn back and flee from the war, because the beginning of fleeing is a downfall of the army. And the Gemara is puzzled by the language of the Mishnah. This phrase, because the beginning of fleeing is a downfall, this appears to be backward. The Mishnah should have said the opposite, because the beginning of the downfall is the act of fleeing, right? It's not that the beginning of fleeing, it's that those who flee will cause the beginning of the downfall of the army. That's what it should have said, but it says the beginning of fleeing is the downfall. And the Gemara concedes, indeed, say that the Mishnah means because the beginning of the downfall of the army is the act of some soldiers fleeing. Now, the Mishnah teaches, in what case are these statements said? They are said with regard to elective wars, as opposed to obligatory wars, or wars whose mandate is a mitzvah. Interesting. There are obligatory wars, and there are wars whose mandate is a mitzvah. Different. Rabbi Yochanan says, concerning the various categories of war, the elective war was referenced by the rabbis. This is the same as a war whose mandate is a mitzvah when referenced by Rabbi Yehuda. And the war that is a mitzvah mentioned by the rabbis is the same as the obligatory war mentioned by Rabbi Yehuda. Therefore, Rabbi Yehuda is merely stating that the wars which the rabbis call elective are to be seen as mandated by a mitzvah. In other words, if it's a permitted war, then it is mandated by a mitzvah, right? There must be a mitzvah that allows this war, therefore it falls under the rubric of a commandment, right? In the same way, I suppose that you don't have to eat an apple, right? But when, or let's say, you must eat matzah on the first night of Passover. After the first night of Passover, you don't have to eat matzah, but you cannot eat chametz, right? So if you're eating matzah during the rest of Passover, this is mandated by a mitzvah, even though it is not obligatory. Perhaps that's what they mean by the difference between an obligatory war and one mandated by a mitzvah. Now, Rava said, with respect to the wars that Joshua waged to conquer the land of Israel, all agree that these were obligatory. God said, you will enter the promised land and you will drive out the Canaanites and their abominable, child sacrificing practices, etc. This is an obligatory war. You don't have a choice. With respect to the wars waged by the house of King David for the sake of territorial expansion, all agree that they were elective wars. They were permitted, but they were not mandated. They were not obligatory. When they disagree, it is with regard to preventative wars that are waged to reduce the enemies so that they will not come and wage war against them. One sage, Rabbi Yehuda, called this type of war a mitzvah, and one sage, the rabbis, called it an elective war. And there is a practical difference between these opinions with respect to the principle one who is engaged in a mitzvah is exempt from performing another mitzvah. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, one fighting in this kind of war is exempt from performing other kinds of mitzvahs. What is the law? The wars that Joshua waged. At first, a king is permitted to wage only those wars that are in fulfillment of a mitzvah, i.e. a war against the 7 Canaanite nations, against Amalek, or to save the Jewish people from an enemy who is attacking them, right? So a defensive war to save Jewish lives, this is an obligatory war. Thereafter, a king may wage wars that are elective. For example, a war against other nations with the intention of expanding the boundaries of the land of Israel. This is permitted, but not obligatory. And with that, we finish chapter 8. Now, chapter 9. Chapter 9, another digression, whole other subject, but still on the same hinge idea. What passages from the Torah that need to be recited aloud that you're commanded to recite aloud, which of these must be recited in Hebrew and which are not required to be recited in Hebrew. The Shema, which we say morning and evening, and we declare God's oneness, it's permitted to say that in your own language so that you understand what you're saying. But the warning to the troops before battle, that needs to be done in Lashon Kodesh, in the sacred tongue of Hebrew. And now we're going to discuss what happens when a murder victim is found out in the field and no one knows who killed him. There's a ritual for that called the heifer whose neck is broken, because an animal is sacrificed as part of this ritual. So before we go to the Mishnah, let me read you the verses from the Torah which describe this ritual. And the reason we're reading it now is because it includes an utterance by the elders of the nearest city, and that has to be recited in Hebrew. If one be found slain in the land which the Lord your God has given you to possess it, right? So this is only in Israel. It's not outside of Israel. One is found slain in the land which the Lord your God has given to you to possess it. He's lying in the field, and it is not known who has smitten him, a murder victim, and we don't know who the murderer is. Then your elders and your judges shall come forth, and they shall measure unto the cities which are around about him that is slain. And it shall be that the city that is nearest to the slain man, the elders of that city, shall take a heifer of the herd that has not been worked and that has not pulled a yoke. And the elders of that city shall bring down the heifer unto a hard valley, which may be neither worked nor sown, not in a farm field, right, but in a valley and kind of wild land. So a heifer that's never performed farm work in a field that's never been farmed. And shall break the heifer's neck there in the valley closest to where the murder victim was found. And the priests, the sons of Levi, shall come near, for the Lord your God has chosen them to minister unto him, unto God, and to bless in the name of the Lord. And every controversy and every stroke shall be according to their word. And all the elders of that city who are nearest unto the slain man shall wash their hands over the heifer whose neck was broken in the valley. And they shall speak and say, quote, our hands did not spill this blood, nor did our eyes see. Forgive, Lord, your people Israel, whom you have redeemed, and suffer not innocent blood to remain in the midst of your people Israel. And the blood shall be forgiven them. So shall you put away the innocent blood from the midst of you, when you shall do that which is right in the eyes of the Lord. Interestingly, so when does this come up? When you can't find the murderer, right? But first, you got to try to find the murderer, right? So the land of Israel is a place of elevated holiness that will spit out inhabitants who don't behave in a holy manner therein. So there's lots of different aspects to holiness, and one is making sure that you have a working legal system that pursues justice in a just manner and ensures that murderers will be brought to justice. All right, chapter 9, Mishnah number 1. So we'll read the Mishnah and the beginning of the Gemara, where we're deep into page 44b. Mishnah number 1 of chapter 9. In certain cases of unsolved murder, the Torah prescribes a ritual performed with a heifer whose neck is broken. During the course of this ritual, the judges say a confession in the sacred tongue, in Hebrew. As it is stated in the verse, if one be found slain in the land which the Lord your God has given you to possess it, lying in the field, and it is not known who has smitten him, then your elders and your judges shall come forth. Now, what is the procedure for this ritual? 3 members of the high court of the Sanhedrin that is in Jerusalem would go out to see the corpse. It's a big matter, right? It's not a local matter. So even if this, a murder victim of an unsolved murder found way in the north of Israel, they would have to send for judges from the Sanhedrin in Jerusalem to be part of this ritual. So 3 members of the high court of the Sanhedrin that is in Jerusalem would go out to see the corpse. And Rabbi Yehuda says 5 would go out. As it is stated, your elders in the plural form, indicating at least 2. And it is written, and your judges in the plural form, indicating at least another 2 judges. And the court may not be comprised of an even number of judges because they need to be able to issue a majority ruling. Consequently, they add to them one more elder. And that's why 5 judges from the Sanhedrin go out. If the corpse was found concealed in a pile of stones, or hanging on a tree, or floating on the surface of the water, then the judges would not break the neck of the heifer. Meaning we don't do this ritual. As it is stated, if one be found slain in the land, and not concealed in a pile of stones, lying on the ground, and not hanging on a tree, in the field, and not floating on the surface of the water. If a corpse was found close to the border of the country, or close to a city in which the majority of its inhabitants are non-Jews, or close to a city that is without a rabbinical court of 23 judges, then the judges would not break the heifer's neck. Additionally, the elders measure the distance from the corpse only to a city that has a rabbinical court with 23 judges. That's Mishnah number 1 of chapter 9. Here's the Gemara. The Gemara asks, what is the first sentence of our Mishnah saying? The Mishnah is attempting to prove that the verses read during the ritual of breaking a heifer's neck are to be recited in Hebrew. Yet, the verse does not offer any proof of this. Right? Why are we even reading this passage here in Tractate Sotah? Because of this subject, that it has to be read in Hebrew, unlike the warning and oath that are administered to the Sotah. But here, we go on to the ritual. We said it has to be done in Hebrew, but the Mishnah didn't tell us why. So that's why the Gemara is asking. Why? How do we know that this has to be done in Hebrew? The Torah didn't say that. So Rabbi Abahu said that this is what the Mishnah is saying. The confession is recited in Hebrew, as it is stated with regard to the ritual of the heifer whose neck is broken, quote, and they shall speak and say. And later it is stated with regard to the curses stated on Mount Ebal that we learned had to be spoken in Hebrew, right? The curses and blessings that were spoken as the children of Israel were about to enter the land. In that passage it said, and the Levites shall speak and say. And just as the word speak that is said later with regard to the Levites is referring to a speech that is recited in the sacred tongue, so to hear the declaration about the corpse that was smitten and the murderer not found, this also is recited in the sacred tongue. So the Mishnah continues to answer the question of, and how is the ritual of the heifer whose neck is broken ordered? How does this ritual proceed? So the Mishnah states, it is written in the Torah, if one be found slain in the land, which the Lord your God has given you to possess it, lying in the field, and it is not known who has smitten him, then your elders and your judges shall come forth, and they shall measure unto the cities which are round about him that is slain. Right? And it's going to be the elders of the nearest city that have to perform the ritual. The elders from Jerusalem are going to administer the ritual, but the ones who have to make the statement that, we don't know who killed him, etc., are the elders of the nearest city, so long as that city has a court of 23 judges. Now, 3 members of the high court that is in Jerusalem would go forth. Rabbi Yehuda says 5, and the sages taught, and your elders and judges shall come forth. This is that same proof. Your elders indicates 2, and your judges 2, and a court may not be composed of an even number, so they add 1 more judge. Therefore, there are 5. Well, this is the statement of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Shimon says, your elders indicates 2, and a court may not consist of an even number of judges, so they add to them 1 more, therefore just 3. That's the representatives from Jerusalem. The Gemara asks, but according to Rabbi Shimon as well, isn't it written, and your judges, elders and judges? So why does he not agree that this indicates a need for 2 more judges? And the Gemara answers, he requires the additional word elders in order to teach that they must be the distinguished among your judges. The Sanhedrin was composed of 70 judges, or 71, I suppose. And they were already, the loftiest of the Torah scholars who were appointed to be judges on the Sanhedrin. So says Rabbi Shimon, and you don't just, even though they're already elevated, honored Torah scholars, you don't just send any members of the Sanhedrin, you send the most senior of the Sanhedrin for this case. And so how does Rabbi Yehuda, who derives from the phrase, and your judges, that there's a need for 2 additional judges to go out, and that therefore 5? How does he know that they need to send from the Sanhedrin? He derives it from an extra letter. The verse could have simply stated the elders. Instead, it adds a letter and states your elders to teach that they must be the distinguished among the elders of Israel. And Rabbi Shimon could say, if the merciful one had written in the Torah, the elders, I would say that it includes even the elders of the marketplace, meaning any honorable people. Therefore, the merciful one writes in the Torah, your elders, to indicate specifically Torah sages who are revered by all. And if the merciful one had written in the Torah only your elders, I would say that it includes even elders from a lesser Sanhedrin. Therefore, the merciful one also writes, and your judges, to teach that they must be distinguished among your judges and from the great Sanhedrin. And what is the source of Rabbi Yehuda that the judges may not come from a lesser Sanhedrin? How does he derive this? So he derives the halacha from the verbal analogy between elders written here and elders written with regard to the offering that the Sanhedrin brings when the nation has sinned as a result of a mistaken ruling. This offering is brought by the elders of the congregation. Leviticus 4:15. Now, just as the elders of the congregation are the distinguished among the congregation, meaning from the great Sanhedrin, so too here, our verse is referring to the distinguished among the congregation. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, get them in. The Gemara asks, if he derives this law from this verbal analogy, then he should derive the entire matter from there, including the requirement for 5 judges. If so, why do I need the phrase, your elders and your judges? Rather, it must be that Rabbi Yehuda does not derive the law from this verbal analogy. Instead, he understands that the phrase, your elders, indicates 2. Your judges indicates that they must be distinguished, and among your judges, they must be distinguished among your judges. And the letter Vav in the phrase, and your judges, is to add 2 more to the count of the judges. And Rabbi Shimon does not accept this derivation because he does not learn anything from the letter Vav. Right? Vav, when you add it as a prefix to a Hebrew word, means and. So Rabbi Shimon doesn't interpret when there's a Vav. He's like, that's just what the syntax in the Torah required, whereas Rabbi Yehuda says we can derive an additional teaching from that. So rather, according to Rabbi Shimon, what is the merciful one saying in the Torah with the phrase, and your judges? He is referring to the distinguished that are among your judges. So the Gemara raises an objection. However, that is so. If every plural form in the verse adds another 2 judges, then when it later states, and they shall go out, this should indicate another 2. And they shall measure should indicate yet another 2. This means that according to the reasoning of Rabbi Yehuda, there should be 9 judges enumerated here, while according to the reasoning of Rabbi Shimon, there are 7. The Gemara responds, he requires that verse, and they shall go out and they shall measure, for that which is taught in a different baraisa. And they shall go out, this serves to emphasize that they themselves go out and not their agents, i.e., the judges from the Sanhedrin may not appoint an agent to measure the distance from where the body was found to the nearest city. You would think that, okay, they're going to be there and supervise the measuring, and then when the elders of that nearest city are brought and they speak these words from the Torah that they have to recite, that the elders from Jerusalem just supervise that. But no, says Rabbi Yehuda, that no, these judges from Jerusalem personally measure from where the body is found to the nearest city to establish which is the nearest city, personally. Quote, and they shall measure teaches that even if the corpse was found clearly near to a particular city, they would nevertheless measure the distance, as it is a mitzvah, it is a commandment to engage in this act of measurement. It's a big hoopla that the judges from Jerusalem have to come and local elders have to come. And I mean, imagine if any time there was an unsolved murder, the Congress and the president would have to send, not representatives, maybe not the president, but senators, right? Senators would have to go anywhere in America where there's an unsolved murder, publicize that there's an unsolved murder, and conduct a ritual where, let's say, the mayor and the council members of the nearest city come and say, we regret that this happened. We don't know why it happened. We don't know who killed this man, but we regret that this happened. I mean, imagine the level, the spiritual level of the country when everyone is held to such a standard. It's good. All right, let's go to questions or comments on Daf Mem Daled, page 44, here in Tractate Sotah. Bill, wait a moment. Hold the phone. In this list of prohibited marriages that would not release you from the military service, we find a widow betrothed to the Kohen Gadol. Are we from this to take it that the high priest of all Israel would be drafted? Good. No, right? Impossible. So what does this mean? I think they're just giving that as an example of a prohibited marriage. And we know that the Kohen Gadol is not going to be drafted as the priest anointed for war. That's a separate office. It has to be a different priest who becomes the Kohen Gadol anointed for war. The actual Kohen Gadol, the high priest, has to stay either at the tabernacle or at the temple to continue doing the daily offerings that the high priest needs to do, because that's also part of the war effort. So what could this mean? Well, if it's one of these obligatory wars, and according to one possible but very unlikely interpretation, that the women fight too, so maybe this woman might have been excused, but she's not excused. Or perhaps this widow who was betrothed to or even married a high priest, and then let's say he died, and then another priest would betroth her, a regular priest. Now, a regular priest can betroth and marry a widow. He can't betroth or marry a divorcee. But I believe that if she was first a widow, she was a widow twice, let's say, but the first time she became a widow, she then married the high priest, which would disqualify, by the way, that high priest from being the high priest. He at that point would lose his office. Well, there you go. If he married a widow, he's no longer the high priest. Maybe that's the solution to our problem. If he marries a widow, he's no longer the high priest. He can't serve as the high priest, and therefore he's no longer the high priest, and now he would go. But since he married her while he was high priest, this marriage would not excuse him. That's my surmising. That's my guess. Elvis, general comment. So many laws of marriage, family, and property seem to be aimed at the continuity of these things for the benefit of the community, even when the actual application is applied to the individual. Just so. This is a team effort, right? We've talked about this at other times. It's sort of like the Jewish mission, the chosenness of the Jewish people. Means not that they're better. In fact, we've talked before that it might be that the Jews were chosen because we're such a difficult people that if we're able to put aside our personal stubbornness to be part of the Jewish mission, as it were, and to be held to this very elevated holy standard, well, if we could do that, then anybody can do that, right? If we can become holy, anyone can become holy. But bottom line, it is something that is done in community. And so many of these practices, really what they end up doing is separating us from non-Jews, and just making this team effort that it's so difficult. It has to be done in community. And it's not that we can't have friends and business relationships and close friendships with non-Jews, but it is that we have to draw together in this team effort to make sure that everyone is living up to this obligation. All right, the Lubavitcher Rebbe took this very seriously, and that's why the mission of Chabad, of the Lubavitch movement, has been to go out, and the mission of Rabbi Adam Steinsaltz, right, who translated and elucidated the Talmud, the first one to do the whole Talmud in 1,000 years, and his motto was, let my people know. Because tragically, we live in a time when so many Jews are disconnected from Judaism, from the Jewish mission, and it's something that everyone, Jews and non-Jews, should quake in their boots. That so many Jews are disjoint from the Jewish mission. That is a bad state of affairs, not only for the Jews, but for the whole world. So, we're doing what we can here. And I think there is a growing thirst for meaning in the world. And I think there are many Jews who are tragically alienated from Judaism, but there's also a rising of saying like, well, we went out and we looked for meaning elsewhere, but then there's something in this ancestral connection to the Jewish family, right? Because we are a family. At the end of the day, we're all the children of Israel, right? Of Jacob and his father Isaac and his father Abraham. And you don't have to be born into this family to join it, right? So like a non-Jew can become a Jew, and that's sort of like an adoptive sibling who is just as much a sibling as everyone else. But there's this longing, I think, on people who, were out to come back, because when you become part of this work, it's difficult, it's exacting, it's frustrating, it's tough to understand sometimes, but it elevates you and gives meaning. Sharon, where did that be noted about obligatory wars having a different standard? I don't remember that in the Torah. I always understood that the exemptions were universal to all military operations in the Torah. Here you saw it, right? So this was, where were they? How did they come up with this interpretation? I don't know exactly what they're hinging it off of. That would be a bigger study. But the halacha that I read to you that Rav Steinsaltz is bringing down he's citing the Rambam in Sefer Shoftim, Hilchot Melachim, Milchatochem, 5:1, and Lechem Mishna there, right? So it's basically the Rambam, Maimonides, that he's citing on that the wars of the conquest of Israel under Joshua were definitely obligatory. Defensive wars are obligatory. Then you have the interesting case, for example, right, and we had this, at least one of the wars in Israel where the enemy is amassing troops, near the border. They haven't attacked us yet, but there's fantastic, compelling reason to believe they will, so we hit first. Right, and that happened against Egypt in 67, definitely I think in 56. But I wish I knew my history of modern Israel better. But at any rate, that first strike, that preemptive strike, that really is a defensive war, that would be a good discussion in this framework. That's a little bit outside the scope of today's class. Sharon also says, I thought it was an egal, a calf. Here it's being translated as the heifer whose neck is broken. It seems like a small detail, but a heifer is an adult animal, and there seems to be something more consequential if it is a calf. Well, is it an egel? When they talk about the heifer whose neck is broken, it is the egla. So I don't know. I don't know why Rav Steinsaltz and the Korn are translating that as the heifer. Maybe it's a teen female cow. I'm not sure. That's what I've got for us today. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow night, Monday, 6 p.m. Pacific, the regular time, for page 4.